Welcome to Real Talk, a place where we have real conversations about faith, doubt, and everything in between. I'm your host, Reverend Thea Curry-Fusen, and today I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Reverend Lataya Simpson. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to have a conversation on why are we different. So if you just start by introducing yourself, where you're currently serving, and why you decided you'd join in this conversation today.
Sure. I'm Lataya Simpson. I'm serving at St. Matthew's United Methodist Church in North Houston. It's a great church with great people who are all very different. I was really interested in this subject matter because I'm a mom. I have 3 kids. My husband is a pastor also, and I don't meet a lot of people like me that are pastors and married to pastors and have 3 kids, and 2 of them are on the autism spectrum, and I'm also serving in a cross-cultural appointment. So I'm always facing difference and divergence in some unique ways, and I've always been blessed in that. So thanks for inviting me to be on the show today. I'm excited about it. I look forward to our conversation.
Yeah. Why don't we start by just sharing a little bit of your faith journey? How did you find Jesus? And then maybe even a little bit of what led you into pastoral ministry.
Yeah, okay, sure. I was a church kid growing up, and my mom took me to her home church, which was a 30-minute drive from our home every Sunday when I was a kid, and we would be late every Sunday. And it didn't matter if we were late. Mom, we were going to church. And the pastor knew me, and the pastor knew my entire family. It was across the street from my grandmother's house. And so it was sort of our family tradition to be a part of this church, and a lovely place. And about 8 or 9 years old, I told my mom, I understand everything the pastor's talking about. I think I'm ready to be baptized now as a Baptist church. And she said, okay, go ahead. And so you had to walk down the aisle and make your confession and sit there and wait and tell everybody that you felt called to be baptized. And so 4 weeks later, I got baptized, and my baptism stories, I love sharing it because we had a pool. Baptism is like a big giant bathtub that the water comes up to your chest. And so I was a little kid, so it actually did come up to my chest. For them, it just came up to their waist, and they baptized me. And like whole head, face, everything underwater. I came up, and it felt awful. It was not this, light shining down moment. It was like, oh, I'm drowning. And so the pastor goes out of the baptismal pool, and he goes up these rickety old wooden steps, and I go to step out on these wooden steps, and they break. And so I'm stuck in the baptismal pool. And I just, panicked a little bit. And so they wanted me to pull myself out of the baptismal pool. And I was 8 years old, no upper body strength. I was not Simone Biles, okay? Tried to pull myself out, couldn't. They tried to help me. They couldn't pull me out either. And so it came to this moment, and this is so much a part of my call, where I couldn't get out on my own. They couldn't pull me out. We had to work together. I had to pull. They had to help. And you can't. And that was my first real introduction to the fact that on this Christian journey, you can't do it on your own. You've got to be in community. You need others, but they can't do it for you.
Wow.
Yeah, and as I've explored my story, I came to the understanding of that moment happening for me, and that moment being so divine. But fast forward to when I was 14 or 15 years old, I went to a Fellowship of Christian Athletes camp, and it was a very Pentecostal, high praise, give your life to Jesus type thing, and I'd never heard, I need to give my life to Jesus. I was raised in the church, you're already a Christian, all of this stuff. But the idea of giving my life to Christ was so compelling. It was so inviting. It was what I wanted to do. And so at 15, I did that. I gave my life to Christ. I accepted that invitation to love him, to follow him, to claim him, knowing that I was already claimed. And I called my mom and I told her, Mom, I gave my life to Jesus. She was like, well, what does that mean? What happened when you got baptized? Oh, so many years ago. I said, well, I mean, it's no less important, but now I have a deeper understanding of committing my life to Christ, and I'm going to do that. And I feel called to do something greater, and I don't know what that is, but the next day they invited us to, who feels called to go further and be a pastor or be a leader or something like that. And I raised my hand immediately. And they said, okay, well, some of you will pursue ministry in the church, and one day you might be a pastor. And some of you won't be a pastor, but you'll still lead. Maybe it's in the community, maybe it's at your workplace, maybe it's at your school, but don't wait until you're an adult. Start leading now. And so I started leading the Fellowship of Christian Athletes at my high school. And for 3 years, I taught Bible study in a high school, in a public high school, and had the full support of the administration and the teachers, and the students loved it. And I knew absolutely nothing about the Bible or theology other than what I read, but people were receptive, and still to this day, I run into people that say, I remember we were in Bible study together, and I appreciate what you did. So anyway, that's kind of my long version.
Yeah.
But just a delightful memory to share.
That's interesting, even in your both your faith story as well as even your call to ministry. Those are different, very different than mine. I was baptized as a baby in the Catholic Church, not because my parents were super involved, but because my grandmother said you had to, and they didn't want to continue to fight with her, and so they said, okay, fine, we'll baptize her. I mean, we kind of believe in God and stuff, but. And then later in life, much later in my 20s is when I really was exposed to this relational God, and for the first time, and thought, yes, 100%, I want to be a part of that. I believe, God was present at my infant baptism, but I did do kind of a remembering of my baptism as an adult where I could make that decision. And actually that was in some little harbor out in Clear Lake. We still drive past it sometimes, and remember that day. And I was able to get out of it. I didn't have to have any help. But I remember coming out of that water I did feel refreshed and cleaned and made new, and had no idea that God had all of these plans in place. I think if I did, I always tell people, I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have said no. I wouldn't have said yes. If I would have known my friend inviting me to Deer Park United Methodist Church would have led me to becoming a pastor in United Methodist Church, I would have said no. But along that journey, I love that you also said your baptism story is such a reminder of how much you have to work together, and that it's in a community, and that I know for me, so often I just want to do it all on my own. I've got the best idea. I've got it figured out if everybody could just get on board. But what a illustration of it, and God showing you super early, hey, and I think we're similar in that way, that we have great ideas, and people should fall in line and get on board. But to remind you maybe over and over again that yes, you have great ideas, and these people do too, and you're going to have to work together. I think that's
I mean, you need me, I need you. You need me, I need you. It's not one of those things is not greater than the other. We both need each other, and God is above all of that. And I have to learn that lesson over and over again.
I know for me, growing up unchurched for the most part, I mean, I did go to church. I'd been exposed. I was familiar with the idea. I always said I had a nominal faith. I believed in God. I just felt like I celebrated the holidays for the right reason. I just didn't really understand. And again, never been exposed to a relationship with Christ. But I see where my different upbringing and coming into church in my 20s. I mean, I've only been a Jesus following Christian for I think 13 years, 16 years, something like that. And it's not very long in the grand scheme of things. And I realize how that gives me a different perspective as a pastor today, as a believer, someone who's come into faith later in life. And I can see where that different upbringing, different experiences gives me, like I said, a different view now, a different view of what the future might be, a different view of even the past, because I don't necessarily have maybe some of those nostalgic, heartwarming. My memories of church as a child weren't warm and fuzzy. I did like the children's message of the Presbyterian church that my grandma took me to, because I felt, oh, this one's for me. they actually know I'm here and they actually care, because everything else we did, I had no idea what was going on. But other than that, I don't have a lot of those fond, like strong memories or a desire to hold on to maybe some traditions and things like that. But I'm curious for you. You mentioned, you're a mom. Your husband's also a pastor. What are some ways that the way that you see your life different affect and maybe bring you a unique perspective in your faith walk today as a pastor and just as a disciple?
I was always a different kind of kid, and I've always been a bit different, mostly because I was very direct. I was very, very direct as a child. I had no filter. I listened to every conversation and I butted into every conversation. And as I grew up, I learned how to be a bit more appropriate in that sometimes, maybe still. I might still struggle with that. But I care about people and I care about what people think. And I really want to engage with others. And I was always called an old soul when I was younger. And now I have the blessing of having 3 kids that are also these little old souls. And as I mentioned earlier, 2 of them are on the autism spectrum. My uniqueness of being very direct has been mirrored back to me. My uniqueness of having no filter has been extremely mirrored back to me. And I've begun to see both the joys and the pains of not always being aware, self-aware, or aware of others. And so I love to get to know myself. And I was a chaplain for a year, and some of the work that we did was to spend time really getting to know who we are and how we came to be the way that we are. Good work, very, very good work, and how we relate with others. And so I am always looking for ways to connect with others and ways that we are alike and ways that we are different, but how we can honor that as well, if that makes sense. So, my kids teach me a lot. My work teaches me a lot. And I'm grateful that God continues to show me by his Spirit that I don't have to be in one box. I can grow and change, and I don't have to be, you hear about people that they say, oh, the way she's always been that way, and I like that about her. Like, well, you won't like that about me, because I am constantly changing and growing. And for me, that's what I need. I need to be growing because I need to be getting better. And the better version of me that's on the way is going to be different than the okay version of me that you had yesterday. But the constant growth is my focus. And I think that's one thing that differentiates me in some ways from others as well, because I'm okay with change. I'm okay with changing and being changed and transformed. And I think that's what we're called to be, right? In Christ. Yeah. So I really lean into that. I really lean into that.
Yeah, that reminder that we're called to be made new. And that means that we have to be willing to be different than who we used to be. And that doesn't mean you completely change all of you. I don't subscribe to total depravity, that there's nothing good in me, that the only good in me is of Christ. No, God made me. God doesn't make junk, Now I have some, I have sin, I have failures, I have mistakes, I have ego, I have pride, I have all of that. And so, yes, there are pieces of me that could be better and cleansed. And isn't that a piece of the story too, that you have to come with that humility and that willingness to surrender? Just like you said, to truly give God your entire life, right? And what a reminder that at 8, you probably didn't understand what that meant.
I didn't.
And at 15, probably still too, but at least you could have a better grasp, and to know that you made that decision then, and then continue to be pulled back to it and say, okay, I said my whole life. And as I say that, I have to remind myself that too. Just last night, it was like, okay, God, again. Everything, every single thing, my convenience, my comfort, the way I want things to be and the way I think they should be, I'm going to give that up to you too, right? And this constant reminder and willingness. And some of the things I get kind of amazed by is how much my life truly is different than it was. And not just before I found faith, but even at the early parts of my faith or last year or 2 years ago, just how much this, what we call in the United Methodist Church, this sanctification, this continued perfection goes on and on to cleanse us and make us new and make us different over and over again. You mentioned your directness too, and that's definitely a trait that we share. It's probably one of the things that we're drawn to in each other. And I know for me that I feel like my directness comes from, I lived in so much chaos and fear for so long and still struggle with that I'm like, let's break through all that. Tell me right up front, give me the worst news. Just let's make it real clear so I know what we're dealing with, right? Because I know that anxiety is too much for me to be wondering. And so I don't want you to wonder. I don't want to wonder. So let's just put all our cards on the table. Mm-hmm. And most people don't act that way. And I would argue, especially in the church, a lot of people don't act that way. And that's something I too have to learn, that not everybody is maybe ready for all my cards, especially on day one. Mm-hmm. Maybe not everybody should have to carry all my cards, ever. Mm-hmm. And that while that's who I want to be, that's how I long to be, that's my coping mechanism with the world, that it's not always the safest and best bet. And so to even have to learn, okay, this is how I want to be, this is how I prefer to be, this is how I think we'd all be safer. Mm-hmm. Let me pull back a little bit, because interestingly, I don't like it when people are super direct to me. I'm like, whoa, let's calm it down. Where are you coming from? Yeah. Even though in my head, I'm like, oh, you just would say exactly what you mean. Well, sometimes what people mean is not always kind. Mm-hmm. It's not always soft. And then I have to realize, like, oh, this is how they might feel when I'm coming with all my directness. Mm-hmm. As we realize, like, kind of some of the ways these differences have made us who we are and who we even will continue to strive to be, I just want to get real and like, why do you think we are all so different? I mean, you as a mom with your children, even if they have similar situations, are very different, right? They come from the same people, they live in the same house. Mm-hmm. Why are they so different? And then as a pastors, we look at the church, the different churches you've served, where you are now. Why is it that we're all different? Why isn't it just like a nice little, hey, this is the model, this is what we can expect?
Well, I mean, I think if God wanted us all to have a particular model, then he would have made us all the same. We would be all the same skin tone. Every part of the earth would have the same temperature. We'd have the same hair. We'd have the same eye color. We'd like the same foods. All of the birds would be the same size. And there's variation and difference in every iota, every atom ever created. Mm-hmm. There are no two alike. Mm-hmm. And so there are no two people alike. There are no two anything that are exactly alike, unless it's man-made, unless human beings made it. When we manufacture things, we can manufacture them in a clone manner, because what else can we do? But the Creator who created us creatively intended for us to be beautifully and fearfully and wonderfully made, uniquely and differently. And while we have social norms that we hope people fit into and we want ourselves to fit into, those are norms we created. Those are not norms that God necessarily created. And so when we just take the time to really pay attention to the fact that variation exists everywhere. Even if you look at the table that we're sitting at, the age lines in the wood, no two are alike. There is nowhere other than things that are manufactured and fake. Unless it's manufactured, it's going to be different. And so we need to learn how to embrace and love our differences and embrace and love our divergences and not see them as less. Different, not less is a phrase I hear all the time in regarding to kids, like making sure that you're not being a bully or getting bullied. Different, not less, but understanding that about ourselves as well. I can be different. That doesn't mean I'm less. It doesn't mean I'm more either. It's just we are. We are. Yeah. Our being our natural and normal being is very different. Today in our vacation Bible school, we had some twins that were there, and I just adore these girls, and they're very different. They're very different. I may not be able to tell them apart by their faces, because they are identical twins all the time, but typically I can tell them apart by how their body language might be different, or their tone of voice might be different, or the way they interact with the group might be different, how they respond to me may be different. And I'm sure their parents are raising them the exact same way. There's no time differentiation. I have 3 kids, and there's a joke. It's not really a joke. It's a serious where they say your first kid gets one kind of parent, your second kid gets an entirely different parent, your third kid gets that parent that's just forgets about you. And so the parent of the third child is different than the parent of the first child. Yeah. But you continue to parent all 3 simultaneously. Yeah. And mine are, 13, 12, and 7. So they're spread out, in a decent way, but I still parent them differently. And I try to love them all very well, but that first child still gets first child kind of treatment, and the second child, middle child. If you know anything about family systems theory, she's the classic middle child, and she responds to me, I respond to her, and my husband as well, like a kid who's in the middle, who was the younger and now is a younger and an older, and then the baby who's 7, and I still call her a baby, the baby who I will still pull into my lap and cradle like a baby, and will, And so there's always going to be those things that we invest differently. And it should never be a reflection of quantity of love. And it shouldn't either be a reflection of quality of love. But often it's received that way. And the way we perceive our upbringing does impact how we perceive ourselves. And when we perceive ourselves in a way that's greater or less, or I should always be first, or I'm always going to be last, or I'm a middle kid, those things can impact how we interact with others too. And so our differences vary greatly, and it's normal to have variation. And we need to be more accepting of the fact that we're meant to be molded by Christ, but we're not a mold. There's no mold for us. Yeah, God broke the mold.
When you were talking about, us not all having the same colored skin or the temperature being the same, it reminded me, we really like to go hiking, and, the national forests, they're actually all different. And I always tell my husband, it's like every new park we go to has like a different color that just kind of seeps out. And I remember it was I can't remember which one, but in one of the national forests, I was like, I never realized there were this many shades of green, or reds or browns or even white. There's a place we've hiked outside of Austin multiple times, and it's a lot of limestone. It's just white and gray, and you would think that's dull and boring, but it's so beautiful, and there's all these different colors of white and gray, and you're thinking, how could there be this many colors? And the beauty that is really in that, and not just in nature, but again, in people. As much as I think I'm an amazing person, a room full of Theas would drive me absolutely bananas. I'm so grateful that not everybody thinks just like me. I tell the same to my husband, like, I would have never dated me. I don't know what you were thinking, But, and so grateful that, for instance, he is very different than me. He's quiet, he's passive. He goes along with every plan, doesn't need to make a plan, and I'm like, what's the plan? Let's go. I'll make the plan, But again, how helpful that is, and how he grounds me and brings me down. And, I always say, if I come in at a 17, he's always at a 3. He never jumps to a 20. He just helps me stay. All right, let's pull it down a little bit. We're going to be fine. So that those differences are so beautiful. And so I 100% agree too, that if God wanted robots, that's what God would have created.
He could have absolutely done that.
Exactly. And yet decided that we would be so unique and have our own, even just our own brains and will and creativity. And so, yeah, there's beauty. And you talk about your kids, when you have your three children, when they're all different and you have this uniqueness in them, or a room full of children, you can see how there's this beauty that they're not all the same, that they are, unique and interesting. And sometimes the differences are hard, right? You mentioned social norms, and there are people born with different abilities, different number of limbs, different cognitive, functions, and some who end up living a life that seems very far from the norm or the majority or just even what we expect. And so why do you think that is? I mean, when it causes so much sometimes pain, hurt, fear, loss, what is your explanation on those differences?
I don't necessarily have an explanation. I think I will say part of my growth is I'm proud of myself to say I won't try to explain it, but I will offer a perspective of most differences between people in any setting, in any environment, in any relationship. The difference almost always initially is uncomfortable. Our differences make us uncomfortable, but in maturing as people, in growing in empathy and growing in understanding, we as adults can embrace our differences and seek understanding and try to be more compassionate toward people who have varying cognitive abilities or varying needs. But oftentimes we choose to just be uncomfortable. Instead of being comfortable being uncomfortable, we don't want to be uncomfortable, and we would rather just be comfortable. And so sometimes individuals get isolated, or they get pushed to the side because we just don't want to deal with those differences, when really those differences could be beauties. We don't need 4 hands. We need 2 hands and 2 feet. If a person has those limbs. So there may be, people who are listening now that don't have all of those limbs. You are still fearfully and wonderfully made. But even our 2 hands are different. Your left hand and your right hand, they're different. And we accept that. I accept that I can write with my right hand, but I can't write very well with my left hand. And so if I break it down to something as simple as the variations within my own body, and then look at the variations within the body of Christ, the variations within the body of membership within our communities, and just be willing to be more loving, then I can be more accepting. I can be more open to differences. Now, I don't know why God created everyone to be so different, but part of my job is to accept that God's will is that there is a difference. But, when speaking specifically about people with different cognitive abilities and different abilities in regard to social emotional development, we have so much to learn from each other and so much to gain from each other if we're willing to engage with each other and not try to just force conformity. And when we are willing to hear each other's ideas and see what people have to offer, not force it out of them, on their own terms, at their own pace, the world is so much better. I think of someone in particular, Temple Grandin. Temple Grandin is a world-renowned expert on cattle, and she has autism, and she's the most famous autistic person in the world right now, Temple Grandin. And because her sensory needs, physical sensory needs, were so great, she discovered while she was in college that when cattle are I can't remember what was about to happen. I don't think it was pleasant, but they were put in a machine to be soothed, and she created something for herself to soothe her, to help her calm down. And so I'm hugging myself because that's sort of how she described it, is as if you're being compressed into this nice tight hug. And so she created this more humane way for cattle to then be processed, if you will, to become the food on our plates. But she discovered this process because of her empathy toward the animals and how she felt impacted by how they were being treated. And she didn't necessarily have a lot of friends.
Yeah.
But because she didn't have a lot of friends, she wasn't spending her time with other people, and she invested her time in this hobby and her academics. She has impacted this entire industry. And impacting this industry, she's sort of gotten all of this acclaim, and now she has a voice that impacts families of children who have autism to say, hey, you need to embrace their differences. You need to embrace what they have to offer and let them be who they are and help them be their best selves. Me helping you be your best self doesn't mean you have to become like me. I don't need to tell you, you need to be more direct because I'm direct. You need to be more this because I'm this. Be honest, be compassionate, be empathetic, but be you. And learning how to do that is hard, but we need to check ourselves frequently to see how are we forcing conformity on others and on ourselves. How are we forcing something that doesn't belong to us? We shouldn't wear shoes that don't fit, but we're always trying to put people in them. And so, long answer, I know, but I don't have an explanation as to why we are different other than there are gifts and our differences if we will pay attention and allow those gifts to be revealed.
Yeah. Well, and what I always kind of response when I get asked that kind of question, well, why did God let this happen? Why was this person born this way? Why did they have to experience this thing? And I think typically the reason why we're even drawn to that question tends to be because we want people to be more like us, or we want ourselves to be more like the way we want ourselves to be, right? Our idea of perfection, beauty, good. And again, I wonder if it's not a place, a direct, even, powerful place where God isn't saying, let go of the way you think things should be. Let go of your will, your ways, your design for humanity, and even for yourself and your own life, and accept and receive this glorious thing that I am giving you. Yes, the Gospels are full of Jesus healing people who had physical differences and different abilities. And sometimes I'm pretty sure that there was truly miraculous. Someone can walk and they can walk again. But sometimes I often wonder too, if the healing wasn't necessarily a cure, but just they were seen, they were touched, they were loved and adored. And I can only imagine what it feels like when Jesus Christ looks you in the eye, that you feel like, hey, I am enough right here in this body that I have. It's kind of the idea that I've heard before that, someone says, well, in heaven, there'll be no wheelchairs. And the response is, no, I think there'll be no curbs. There'll be no more barriers. There'll be no more distinctions or places where those who are different are left out, who are not allowed, who are expected to figure out how to be more like me. And how often I've lived my life that way, like be more like me, do it the way I would have done it. Listen and do it the way I'm telling you to, instead of really being open and willing to see, wow, how are you seeing the world? Maybe I can learn something from you. And I know most people who spend any time with people who live their life differently, whether that be mentally, physically, emotionally, that tends to be what they learn. Like, wow, this person has not only a different physical or mental or social, abilities, but they see the world differently. they are not typically as consumed with the things I am so consumed with. And that can be a place where, at least for a moment even, our brains, who we think all work the same, which they don't, could be opened a little bit more to, wow, the beauty and the goodness that God is up to in all of these different ways. I think that's the good end of it. That's the hope and the beauty of it.
Yeah.
But what about when these differences cause conflict?
Yes.
Real, harsh, unacceptable.
Yes.
Why is that happening?
Well, as you were sharing a moment ago, I was thinking to myself, don't forget to acknowledge that, Lataya, don't forget to acknowledge that our focus on acceptance in recent years and our focus on understanding abilities as not only being disabilities, but there are differing abilities and divergent abilities, but there are also disabilities that exist that are sometimes overlooked, especially in certain areas, like specifically in autism. I don't take my kids to the beach because I'm afraid they're not going to always recognize that the surface of the water is not solid. And historically, if you look at drownings, a lot of times autistic kids drown because they'll go into the water and the sensory impact of going into the water feels so good that they'll keep going. And it's too late when they try to turn around. I've seen my kids jump into the water, jump into a pool and sink to the bottom and not care because they were having this sensory experience and have to be brought out by a lifeguard. And so with my children being extremely high functioning and still having these types of difficulties, these are just one of many difficulties that they have. I do understand why people ask why. And I try to be accepting of the why question. Why has this happened? I don't have to have an answer for it. But yeah, if you need to ask God why, ask God why. And maybe God will reveal that, but I can't. Maybe God will show you why, maybe not. Maybe we won't know until we get to glory. Maybe it's just because, just like sometimes babies are born with cancer. I mean, there are some things we don't have the answer to, and there are some things that are deeply painful and limiting that we should acknowledge and not allow those things to be brushed to the side under the umbrella of acceptance. And so I wanted to make sure I brought that up. But in thinking about when difference brings about major conflict, and thinking about when difference brings about a need for separation, that can be painful. And I think as the church, as Christian persons, whether you're a part of a church or not, we are all the body of Christ. And if you are a person listening and maybe you don't consider yourself a Christian, you don't consider yourself a believer in God, as a member of society, when differences cause so much conflict that separation is required, there is a certain level of pain that comes with that, and it may not always be felt on both sides. But I encourage all persons that if you ever reach a point where separation is required, that separation is done in love as best as possible, because we sometimes do need to protect ourselves from ongoing pain and ongoing grief, anxieties, pressures. Sometimes we need those, but however that can be done in integrity, however that can be done in love, however that can be done without, I don't want to say as a last resort, but not the first option either. Let's not jump to separation and isolation, but pay attention to those things that are safe for you and things that are unsafe, and making sure that you're safe and the people around you that are around you are safe. As you asked that question, I thought about a friend of mine who was being called daily by a friend from high school, and that person called them daily, and they had the exact same conversation daily. And it was clearly a deficit that they were dealing with. And for months and months, the friend of mine tried their best to engage them and tried to change the subject and get them to talk about something else and tried to get them to maybe try calling their doctor and getting some therapy. And it got to a point for my friend where it was just too much. And they had to stop answering the phone. And they had to create some isolation because the pressure that they felt from the relationship was no longer healthy for them. And it was, hearing about it was very painful for me to hear because like, well, you just cut this person out, you know, in my very judgmental way. I thought about that. And after some months, it took me months to get over this. And I wasn't even in the relationship. So judgy. I finally called my friend and told them, this is how I felt. This is what hurt me about what you did, cutting this person out. But I had to come to understand that self-care means that sometimes when conflict gets to be too great because of our differences, sometimes we do have to allow some separation. And we can't be heroes.
Yeah.
We're not heroes. But we don't have to allow small differences, small things that push us to things that bother us, kind of get on our nerves. We don't have to allow those things to where we get to a point where we're going to cut people off.
Right.
And if we are willing to cut people off for small things all the time, we're not reflecting the love of God. We're not. We need to always at least try. And when I thought about it, I was like, she did. She tried for months. And I had to forgive her and forgive myself for judging her, for doing what she thought she needed to do, because that was a conflict that the other person wasn't even aware of. And so you have to exhibit some self-care, but also some understanding and make an effort. Conflicts arise. Conflict is normal, but we don't have to run away from life every single time a conflict arises. Try to work through those things and not just give up on people.
Yeah. Well, that's something that, as you were talking about that, it made me think just Jesus was willing to have those difficult conversations. You know, he was willing to go and, discuss the differences of the way he saw scripture and how he saw people living it out. He was willing to confront those who he felt, were not living up to what God, intended, and the pain and hurt that they were causing. That he didn't hide away from that, even knowing fully what was ahead. And I wonder, in this time of great political differences, and where it sometimes we're led to believe there is nothing we have in common with those who think and vote differently, that maybe we too, could learn from that willingness of, hey, could we at least conversate? Let me hear what you have to say. Again, doing so ideally in a way that keeps yourself safe. But I mean, even still, Jesus opened himself up completely, right? And even let those differences go to such a, what we would say, a horrific end, but also there's resurrection. There's something greater coming. And so to be able to not only be willing to listen and hear and maybe even accept a little bit of differences. I remember one of the first things I learned in early church planning was it has got to be okay that someone doesn't like what we're doing, and I'm going to love them enough to say, it's okay, you're allowed to be mad. You're allowed to not like this. That doesn't mean that we became best friends or that person ever wanted to be a part of the ministry again. But I had to be able to say, hey, I'm going to love you enough and let you have your different view and your different idea about what we should do. And maybe you'll allow me to have mine. And that's where I stand now, even just, in our denomination and our faith, and preach often, hey, this is where I feel like this is what God is saying. This is my interpretation. This is how I view this. You are welcome to believe differently. And the only thing we have to agree on is that it's okay that we don't. That's the only thing we have to agree on, that it is okay that we are different. And I know that those who read scripture differently live out the call in scripture differently, I learn from them. If I'm willing to talk to them, if they're willing to talk to me, if there's not an attempt to change one another, but to, again, kind of accept these differences, then I think that's a place that I know for me that I can learn. And something I always fear is I don't want to be a room full of Theas.
Yeah.
I'm going to learn nothing.
Yeah.
I'm pretty clear on what Thea knows and what Thea wants and how Thea thinks like things need to be.
Yeah.
And so it's only with those who have a different opinion, a different view, a different background, a different hope, a different dream that we could learn too. And that even in the things that are difficult and scary and hard to be different on, that there's an opportunity to learn and grow there too. And if we could, that would be my hope, right? That we could be willing to see those, be willing to lean in and learn more, not turn away, not isolate or block and say, I don't want anything that's different. Because I think what we're meaning is we don't want anything different than me.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty egotistical place to be.
Yeah.
And so to be open to those differences, to be open to learning and growing, and even if it's hard and difficult, what beauty might still come.
Yes. I think conformity, the word that kept coming to mind as you were talking was conformity. Like why do we want everyone to conform to our ideas, our ways? And even if in thinking about the political side of things, I know people who are going to vote differently than I'm going to vote. I love them no less. I don't understand some of their decisions, but guess what? They don't understand some of my decisions either. And not everything that you do has to make sense to me, right? But instead of trying to conform them into being more like me, I want to just be my best self with them and know that I'm with them in life and let them know that I'm with them on the journey and accept that they are with me on the journey. And even if that means we don't talk about politics, like that's not a subject everybody has to talk about. You know, we don't need to talk about that unless we just want to fight, unless we just want to get into a disagreement, because half the time I'm not going to change your mind by sharing my argument. You're not going to change my mind by sharing your argument. But what I will say is I thought about, from a political perspective, I have a friend who has gone on to heaven about 10 years ago. And she told me that in the 70s, when she was working her first job, she made friends with a woman. Now, my friend, Peggy, she was African-American, and the person that she made friends with was a white woman. And after a year of them being in relationship and being co-workers in that sort of professional environment, periodically they'd sit at their desk and have lunch together. They'd eat their tuna sandwiches at the same time. They got along great, but there was always a distance between them. And one day, the person that was a friend of Peggy's said, can I touch you? And she said, what do you mean, can you touch me? She said, can I touch your skin? And she said, why? She said, because my father taught me that if I was around black people too much, I would turn black. And if I touched a black person, that I would turn black. And I believed him my whole life. And now I realize maybe that's not true. And even if it is, so what? And so she was like, yeah, okay, you can touch me. She reached her arm out and she touched her, and she was like, your skin feels just like mine. You know, it was this moment of shifting. And if Peggy had spent the year preaching to her about how black people and white people are the same, white people are the same, and how we're different but not different, that we are all beautifully and fearfully and wonderfully made, and you shouldn't be racist, and you should love everybody else, all of these things that are true. But if she had spent all that time having a conversation like that with her, that moment never would have happened. That barrier never would have been broken. That turn never would have been turned. That corner never would have been turned. And so they just built a relationship. And neither one of them forced the other to change, but change happened. Change happened. And so we have to spend less time trying to convince and trying to force others to conform to our ideas. Because number one, we've got a lot of growing to do. We've got a lot of shifting to do. And if we would just be willing, I mean, as Christians, real talk, if we would just be willing to let God form us so that we could become more holy, we can see the plank in our own eyes so that we could grow and be more willing to be open to difference that exists in so many ways. I'll never forget that story because Peggy's friend exists in lots of other people who were taught ignorant statements just like that became a part of their psyche. And they passed on those types of I can't remember the word I'm looking for. I'm sure it'll come to me at 2 a.m. But these ideas, these mental pictures of what is true and what is not about other and others. And those ideas get passed on, unfortunately, to our detriment. And they are not changed in argument. They are changed in relationship. They are changed when major events happen, major crises happen. That's when those things change. I can preach to you on Sunday because that's my job. You're going to get 20 to 30 minutes of a nice sermon of how we're supposed to live. But when I step out of that pulpit, my life should be a sermon, not my words. And as Christians, we need to learn how to be more like that because the more we try to convince, the more we push people away. The more we try to conform, the more we convince people that that's not the way, the truth or the light. And so that story came to mind. I don't remember was there a question in there, but
I love it. I love that reminder of the importance of relationships. I mean, it made me think just in most marriages or even, intimate relationships, you actually tend to look for someone who is different. You find someone who was raised differently because it's refreshing, it's new, it's exciting, But then I also thought about how different each of those first followers of Jesus were. And it was through the Chosen and their depiction of this really ragtag group of guys and gals and how different they were that it made me realize, oh yeah, they weren't instant best friends. There was Matthew, the tax collector, who had literally betrayed his own people, turned his back on his Jewish faith for money, to Peter, who knew every, psalm ever written, but yet never had a dollar to his name. And this ongoing animosity. And yet Jesus knew, well, if you just come together, you'd have some meals, spend some time, see some really amazing things that God is up to. Then maybe you would learn, and I think this is exactly why also his last, commandment to them is love. Love one another.
As I have loved you.
And this is how the world will know. He never says, go and preach these sermons that I taught you, go and say these things, go and convert all these people. He says, love one another. And this is how the world will know. And yes, you are going to go on and baptize, but that's because you're going to be in relationship with people. And, as a pastor, those are the best baptisms, where you have walked with this family or you've walked with this young person, adult, and you've seen the transformation. You've seen them come to this decision. I'm ready for more. I'm ready to commemorate this grace that God has poured out upon me, and you get to walk alongside them. And that's really what it's about, those relationships and how different they all are. I think sometimes for me as a pastor, I could look at congregation churches I served and almost want to kind of put them all in a box. And then when I stop and start to picture each of their individual different faces, I realize, it's just a room full of people. And yeah, maybe I didn't like this decision that they made. But man, this person had such a good heart. And this one was always so funny. And this one never missed an opportunity to say that they were glad that I was there, And when you start to, again, be that willingness to build that relationship, then those places where we differ dramatically, they're not so important anymore, And so, yeah, I would agree that's another place of hope for how we deal with people who are different. Get to know them, learn why. Why do you think this way? We talked about politics. What would it be like if we really sat and said, well, why are you going to vote that way? Not with the decision or just attempt to change. Let me really understand. Or maybe we could talk about it after we already voted. That way we don't have to feel like there's a chance that we could change one another. But just like, why did you do that? Help me understand with that compassion and that. Let me understand why you saw this differently than me. Other words of hope. What would you offer someone who's maybe struggling with just differences? They feel different. They see differences. They don't understand the differences. What are your words of hope?
If you feel different, if you feel that your differences are causing you struggle, number one, love yourself. Love you. Be your best friend. Get to know yourself and honor those things that make you who you are by knowing them. And it doesn't mean that you hold on to them tight like a pit bull. It just means that you begin to understand what makes you who you are. And if those are things that actually align with your values, if you are being who you want to be, and are you really being true to yourself in your differences, we should all be changing and shifting toward growth. And that means sometimes some petals fall off. Sometimes there's some pruning in the process, but love yourself enough to know yourself and to respect yourself and to honor the God in you, because God made you and you are fearfully and wonderfully made just as you are. Imperfect. What are the phrase warts and all? However it is, whatever is your situation, love yourself. Be your best friend, because you have a lot to offer no matter who you are. And the things that you do have to offer, they are valuable. You are worthy. And it may not mean that you're going to get along with everybody. Everybody are not your people. Everybody's not going to be your village. But my hope is that everyone will find some people, that everyone will find some type of community and some type of way to connect with others, whether they are like you or not, and be at peace with them, and most of all, be at peace with yourself. Find a way to be at peace with yourself. If you're feeling just alone and isolated, you're going to always have you. But seek out community, and in seeking it out, know that it's not always going to be your way. You're not always going to be right. Yeah. And even if you're right isn't always worth it. Sometimes you're going to be right. But if you want to be in right relationships, sometimes we have to let things go because they may not matter that much. Yeah. We shouldn't have fallings out over the flavor of coffee or the condiments that we put in our food. I hear people having playful arguments all the time about things like sugar and grits or, and it's ridiculous, but it always grates my nerves because I know how quickly these petty, playful arguments can actually turn into hurt feelings unnecessarily. And, so just seek understanding and don't fight over the small things. Yeah. Understand that some things really are not that big a deal, and some things are. Yeah. Some things are a big deal, and you don't have to be everybody's best friend. But maybe seek out someone and try to find community.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is just try not to be so afraid of differences, whether it's people who look, think, act, walk, talk, eat, drink, vote. If they're different, try not to be so afraid. Trust that there's something good there, and something to learn and some beauty to be seen too. So thank you again for joining us today. Thank you for your words, and thank you for tuning in. I hope that you'll like, subscribe, share, and follow us. Send to a friend who needs to hear a conversation on how things can be different and still be okay. We'll see you next time. Real Talk Podcasts is produced by First United Methodist Church, Pearland, in collaboration with Pearland Podcast Studios, recorded here in Pearland, Texas. We invite you to check out our website at fumcpearland.org to check out additional events and opportunities for you to engage in real talk about faith, and relationships.